Please listen carefully.
Where do you think I am that you attempted to deliver this and I wasn't home? First of all. Second of all, I have a 24-hour security that accepts all packages. And thirdly, even if you had attempted to deliver it, I don't have a fucking sticky note anywhere saying that you attempted. Don't lie to me. Happy New Year, sisters, and welcome back to another episode of Everyone and Their Sister, our first episode of 2021. I'm Christina.
I'm Natasha.
And I'm Stephanie.
And today we are giving you our much promised and awaited Bridgerton review. We all watched it on the 25th. Some of us finished it on the 25th as well, so that we could have this review up and ready for you the very first week of January. And I'm super stoked to get into it. But before we start talking about Bridgerton, guys, how were your holidays? How was the New Year's that hasn't actually passed for us yet, but will once this episode is live?
It's probably
Take a guess.
If I had to guess, probably just a blur of time that'll be lost playing video games.
I'm pretty sure I'm going to do what I've been doing the past 5 days, is sitting on my bed and watching a television show or a movie. Who knows?
Yeah, pretty much. I feel like I don't know what day it is today. Not that I have Eddie Day this year, to be honest. But every day is a new, like, oh, it's Wednesday? Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like if Friday will come and I'll be like, what?
I think the worst feeling, I mean, I don't know if it's a good or bad, maybe it's just a neutral feeling, is like when you look down at your clock and you're like, oh, it's just 6 p.m., I'll like make dinner or whatever. And then you look down again, what feels like 10 minutes later, and it's midnight, and you're like, well, missed dinner.
The blur for me is really between 12 and 3. Like, that's when I'm like, what? It's 3 a.m. already? I was just putting on a show.
What I love about is that I feel like we all go to bed at like the same crazy time, like 4 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m., but we're not talking together.
No, not at all.
Losing time on our own.
Well, one part is that even though it's been happening all year, I'm constantly surprised whenever Steph messages after 11 p.m.
Yeah.
Because so long went by that, like, after 11 p.m., our group chat would just be me and Nat talking, and then Steph would catch up in the morning if she chose to read it. And then now sometimes Steph will message, it'll be 1 a.m., and I'll be like, why are you awake?
Are you
literally
okay?
Nothing else to do. I don't know, but like I've told you guys, when I was 19, 20, I would go to bed 4 or 5 in the morning all the time, constantly. And like I've just only became an adult in the last 4 years. And I've lost
And
it
now
again.
we're all regressing.
I've lost it again. I'm never going to be able to get up at 7. Leaving the house in 10 minutes to catch a buzz. Like, what?
Ew.
We've definitely, looking at our Bridgerton episode format, we've definitely overrun our time on chit chat. Let's go in.
Bridgerton, guys, it finally happened. It finally was released December 25th. We all watched it. I've watched it twice at this point. Once by myself and the second time with my mother, who I can tell you her comments later on. But Bridgerton is based on the books by Julia Quinn, which were published in 2000. I have an opinion on that later. But basically, Bridgertons follows the family, the Bridgertons, as basically every sibling is going to get married off in this book series. And the first book is Daphne and Simon Bassett and how their love story and how it happens. And to say that this is a pretty accurate historical romance adaptation into a TV show, I would give it a 10 out of 10, but there's other things not great that we'll talk about.
In terms of like overall thoughts for this show, I feel like it did exactly what I wanted it to. It was beautiful. It was visually stunning, beautiful to look at. Costumes were great, even if I really hate Regency era costume or like dresses or whatever. It's fine.
Yeah,
they were still like the beautiful fabric, all of that. Even just like as we'll probably talk about, like there was that article about the color story of Bridgerton as well.
I love shit like that.
Yeah, like just what each color meant and like how it flowed scene by scene. Like all of that was really well done. And overall, I quite enjoyed it. I don't know that I enjoyed every character. I think there were definitely some questionable ones, some on purpose questionable, and some that were just like nothing to me. Like, I don't know. What is your guys' opinion on Daphne? She feels like a nothing person to me.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, I think, okay, the thing that bugged me the most, I don't know if we're already going off topic, but it does about characters. Those books are my least favorite historical romance books I've ever read. Like, I don't
Mhm.
like that series at all. I understand why they picked it. Like, the premise of those books works well for television, so I understand why that series was picked first, but they made no changes to the actual plot of the first book that I think that's what I was expecting, and that's what I'm disappointed in, that they made nothing, no big changes to anything. It's
Mhm.
literally a perfect adaptation, perfect quotes for what of the book, and I that's why I'm mad.
I
Like
think it
you
was
had so
like
many opportunities to make it better.
yeah, this is, like, one of, like, the weird things for me, like, where I feel like they had this, like, source material that they could have worked from already ready to go, like, they didn't really have to change a lot, but they could have built on so much, like, they could have, like, done that extra, like, work to build on the world, on, like, different characters that aren't, like and, like, arguably for, like, a historical romance, obviously, there's gonna be some characters that aren't really built well in the books. They could have done that in the show. They had so many opportunities to do it where you can't do it in the book because you're so focused on the main couple, whatever. You have to have like 10 sex scenes in the book or whatever historical romance requires.
Which they do in the
But
show.
yeah, but like in the show, it's so much quicker. So you had
Yep.
so much time to like build on these. There's like literally no excuse for them not to build on certain characters. Like Marina, 100% need to be built on way more. Because like like she's the pregnant character for those who don't know.
One thing, and this is not like a defense of the show because I mean I feel the same way. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I watched it. I would say like I think it was a good show, but definitely also have some issues with it. But I
Mhm.
will say in terms of building up more characters, one, I fully agree. Everyone is a caricature of a trope. Like
Yeah.
no one really is like a fully well-rounded realized person. They all come off very caricature. But I think when it does come to some of those side characters is knowing that the sounds like their plan is to have a season dedicated for each book, which
Mhm.
means that some of those things might end up getting more fleshed out in the future. Like I imagine Penelope in particular is one that definitely will. Anthony, I'd love to see Marina be a focus for one because she was one of the most compelling characters with
Yeah.
one of the like most warring kind of motives, which you don't really get to see too much of her, which is a shame. So I'm hoping that she has one.
But, like, okay, so here's my thing. They built on Simon's character, and, like, Simon has, like, a backstory and everything, but, like, Daphne has nothing. Like, so if that's the main couple for this season where they had an opportunity to, like, build her character and they didn't do it, what's the hope for the rest of I mean, like, I do think there's a lot of potential in the later seasons because 'cause we've teased out a lot of storylines in this season, but, like, it makes me wonder, I'm like, is there just gonna be, like, a nothing character? And on top of that, Simon is like the only main black lead that we have for what the couples. The rest are all white as far as I know.
Why did they so they had to explain why Simon is black, which they did. And to me, they never did anything with that. Why provide this information and then you did nothing with it?
Like,
Yeah.
did we want like a blind cast like Cinderella or something? Like the Roger
I
and
would have
Hammerstein
preferred
Cinderella?
that rather than
I
this
think
explanation they did nothing with.
Or did we want like a further representation type of thing? Like, I mean, we're getting more into the discourse here, but
yeah, not to take it away completely, but I feel like we kind of have like just dove right into it. Um, I think it's interesting because don't get me wrong, I think there's an element of this that's always going to be a sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't, and is going to be super difficult for even Shonda Rhimes to pull off, especially being a black woman. Because in terms of talking about the discourse, one of the very first things that came up when the show was announced and that she was going to be casting some black characters in it, despite the fact the books are all white, is about historical inaccuracy. And then, like, in addition to just being nonsense, there's like a million and one conversation pieces to have about that alone. But truly, when I was seeing it, like, I feel a lot of people and myself, historical romance is a bit like a fantasy, like
Mhm.
at all times. Like, so often, one of them is not nobility or doesn't have a title. So there's that fantasy element of, okay, but they're going to marry a peasant. And like, there's so much in there that when it was announced, I was like, okay, it'll be like personal history or Brandy Cinderella, where people are just again blind casting. If families can be mixed and no one has to talk about it, it just is what
Mhm.
it is. I personally love that style, but I also recognize that that's not necessarily speaking truth to anyone's experience. So another option is no, we've created an alternate world where this level of racism doesn't exist. There were way more black nobility than there are now, and this is telling that story. So it is going to be more either historically accurate or just again like a reframing the kind of
Like
worldview.
alt history, basically.
Yeah, but what ended up happening was literally neither of those options. Like you took the worst elements of all possible options, and
Yeah.
instead what you had was not a lot of black people because almost like you were trying to keep it historically accurate with like quotes around it, where there's still not many and they're kind of like a handful of characters, but you didn't show them what that means for their lived experience at all, except
Mhm.
for that one conversation
Mhm.
where Lady Danbury, who is basically Simon's mom, really, like that's really who she is, um, has that one throwaway line about how no, we have to be better because, you know, now we're finally in a Rome of police because the king married a black woman. And that's supposed to explain how at no other point in time does their race come up at all, even though presumably up until
Yeah.
10 years before that, black people were just very commonly slaves as well. Like, what is going on in
And
this universe?
it's just like there's such a problematic comment too, like, and to like
Yeah.
not follow that up with anything, to be like, oh, by the way, a white king saved us, and like
Oh,
here we are now, all fully unscathed apparently.
love conquers racism for apparently somehow.
And like what's crazy, okay, and we should probably mention we're referring to a lot of points that came up in a Refinery 29 article, by the way, that we read. I can't remember who it was, two women that did an interview, but a lot of these points came up in there. It was really good. And like I think one of like the the things that they pointed out was that the is it the director or the producer or whatever, Chris Van Dusen, I don't know, I think he's the director, but
He's a
he
producer.
basically producer. Okay, he basically was like, I don't want to have just like black actors in here blind casted. I want it to be representation rather than just like people. But I was just like, you literally went back a billion steps.
You didn't do either. Like that's really
Yeah,
what happened. It was like you didn't do either. You could have done blind casting and at least then you would have had way more faces and I think you would have gotten what for me particularly, and I think for a lot of other people who watch this kind of thing, you get that you can just enjoy things
yeah,
that you take for granted when you are like yourself a white person watching historical things. There's just always white people. Like you never have to worry about just seeing white people being happy because there's a
mm,
million versions of white people being happy. And so blind casting can give you that opportunity to see a lot of diverse faces not having to deal with those particular issues and just being happy and getting to be in pretty dresses and having silly drama that's going to be wrapped up by the end of it. But you literally did neither. You didn't represent anyone's experience accurately because you didn't give the time and space that it needed because you wanted to have your happy romance story. But then you didn't even give them that because you threw in this random bullshit. It
yeah.
was so
Mm.
stupid. I was just gonna step in briefly to say that the Refinery 29 article is by Inye Komonibo and Kathleen Newman Brigman, and it's called A Double Hot Take on Bridgerton, Race, and Romance. So we recommend that, and we'll link it in our like Twitter and stuff.
And I was gonna say the like there's two sides to it. Like what are they trying, like what was the show trying to do? Was it trying to be like that fantasy, like you just want to be happy when you watch this? Or did you want something a bit more meaningful, a bit more like like intuitive? Yeah, like did you want something more intuitive? In which case, like as this Refinery 29 article talks about, it talks about how like you could have explored different relationships in a totally different way. Like even Simon's dad's relationship with him as being a black duke. What is that like? I would love to watch a show where they just discuss how hard it is to be a black duke and what that means in that society, or like how some sort of tensions may not be about, oh, this person doesn't like this person. Is it because of race rather than
Yeah.
just they don't like that
Yeah.
person? Like, are they also like they can't also be colorblind? There's definitely a thing there, and because there's so few black characters, it feels like a natural thing that you assume. Like I just assumed that as I was watching, but then they just never mentioned it. So
Assume
like,
that Simon was like kind of like that dukedom is the only black dukedom in
yeah,
the
or like
society.
even like
That's
with
what I assumed
Marina,
too. Yeah.
I was like, oh, Marina was sent away from her family. Is it because she's like born out of wedlock and she's a black
Mhm.
girl, or is it because of something else? Like, what is it? Like I just assumed there were some other issues there, and I was like, but they never acknowledged it. So I was like, so what's happening?
In that article, they talked about maybe Anthony doesn't want Simon to marry his sister because he was black. Like that was a conversation they never had, and I was like, why wouldn't they talk about that? That could have been he doesn't care about that, but like that's a conversation you'd have if you have one black dukedom in the whole like society like that.
Yeah. I think I think it's also like if they had not had like black like I guess nobility in like the past, if they had them in the past, I think it would have been fine. But because the queen is so like she's alive, she's in her middle, like she's middle aged. It's not like this was not like a past thing. It was like this is the very recent thing that happened. So there's definitely still that stigma out there. Like we I mean, we live in a real world where that stigma still exists. So we're assuming from our own experience, but I think that experience is totally valid with in terms of the show as well. And I think they just completely ignore that. And that's what happens when you have a white producer.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where again, it's just like one, make a choice. Like either take the time to say out, I'm going to do a heavier story and I'm going to genuinely talk about what the situation would be like because there was black nobility and there were wealthy black people in England, but their lives no way look like Simon's. Like that is not a real thing. So make the choice in what you're going to present. And I think one of the things that struck me the most as I was going through Twitter, because I remember when that line came up, I literally remember being like, excuse me, what? Like,
Yeah.
whoa, you've just changed my frame of reference for this whole show. Because I went into it thinking it's going to be blind casting, realizing it wasn't blind casting because one, there were way too many white people for that. And families were all the same race, which I think is a mistake in a show like this because it means you're going to have way too many white people if your lead family is white. Like that's just the core fact of it. Like when the Bridgertons are the main characters, there's 1,100,000 of them. If you make them all white, here we are. It really isn't as diverse as you would want. But then they throw in that other wrench and it takes you out of it completely. And I was seeing that reaction from so many people everywhere of all of a sudden I have questions that I didn't have before. I wasn't wondering if anybody's reaction to Simon was because of his race because it didn't seem to be it was going to be that kind of show.
Mhm.
But then you drop that sentence and now you have to reframe every single thing that you've seen. The way people talk about Lady Danbury now, the way not a lot of people like her despite the fact that she's incredibly lovable. I love her, you
MVP.
know, the way exactly the way that she has to act and her entire personality is now reframed with this knowledge
Mm-hmm.
that again up until 10 years ago which was she allowed to be rich, like
How
what
did she
is
become a lady if you only have a
Yeah.
duke in the last, what, 10, 20, 30 years? Like, what?
yeah
And
How?
like on top of that, like with like the new like this, I guess, white frame of reference now, you're sitting there and you're like, does Lady Danbury only exist for other people? Like what's happening? Like is she like why is she there then? Or why is the queen there? Like what is their purpose now? Like before I was just like, oh, it's like blind casted, things are gonna happen with that. But now I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know what's happening anymore. But like I think it took away from the enjoyment a little bit after that happened or after that line was thrown out there. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it changed my whole mood about the show. I think I still would have felt the same because of the chemistry of the lead characters. I think it was okay chemistry.
It's just Daphne is a white piece of paper, a wet white piece of paper that
yeah,
you. It's like,
Yeah.
Daphne was the real like Simon carried a lot of that.
Yeah.
He really did,
Like
like
I felt more chemistry between him and his like boxer friend. Like when they were like
oh
punching it
yeah.
out, I was like, yes, get down, get into it. Like I was there for it.
I will say I don't know if this is related to the source material or if it's the actress. Like I don't know enough about the original series to say either way. But Daphne just like again from personality, I do think there were moments where I feel like the actress was doing as much as possible, but from a writing standpoint, her characterization is very much someone waiting for things to happen to her.
Oh, yeah.
And you get glimpses of someone interesting when she can take charge and then further discourse to have is then about the consent issues because then it goes too far and you're like, well, now I just don't like you because
Mhm.
this is the most you that I've seen and you did a horrible thing.
I think it's kind of like two things. So, both as like the book character and the TV character, women are brought up to be a wife. Like that is all. That was her only goal. That was what is expected of her. So you can't really like she can't really have a personality when all she wants is to get married. That's why you have her sister Eloise is such a drastic difference from her that you're like
Mhm.
Eloise is 100 times better. And I guess that's the point they're trying to be like not not all women don't want to get married and have kids and have a family. But it's like you needed to give her something because she's so bland. And I think that's again, it's the source material because I didn't care for Daphne. I skipped the first book because I saw the reviews. I'm like, I don't need to. And I read the second one.
They could have spiced her up so easily. Like, it could have been so easy. She was like nothing to work with, and then I mean, like, you could have added anything. I would have been into it, but it was like the dubcon thing was like,
Yeah.
Ooh,
Before we get into that, I would say prior to that moment of then being like having to turn around on Daphne and being just like, no, absolutely don't like her. I think her most interesting moment and the glimpse you really get to her outside of agree of just like saying she's gonna marry Simon, but right like during that duel, is when she is trying to make Simon jealous and she like drops the fan in front of the prince. That was a very different side of her that I was like, I can get down. Like I was interested in that. I think I have a very controversial hot take. I know a lot of people love Eloise. And
go
near the
ahead.
end, I like Eloise more. I don't like Eloise because I think Eloise is the biggest example of a caricature of a person.
Yeah.
Her her being the antithesis to everything that Daphne is makes her someone that doesn't feel like a person. I think this is a problem in historical romance where sometimes you drop a 21st century sensibility into a character that's not in the 21st century. And so you just get this very like out of time comic relief. Like there's an element to Eloise that the point is that like she's annoying because of the things that she wants. And to even someone watching her, the way that she goes about them is very annoying sometimes because it's like she doesn't live in the world that she lives in. So I don't feel like she feels real. I don't think they did a good job at showing what is a woman in that time. Like you would want contrasting things. Even though I don't necessarily love everything that happened with Penelope, I felt like Penelope is a better version of I don't want to just be a wife and a mother. But that also doesn't mean that I am this joke of a suffragette
I
that is
don't
the
think
punchline.
I don't think so. I don't think it's uncommon to have a character like Eloise. It's pretty
No, I don't
common
think it is. I think
that
that's the yeah.
I think, but like, the problem is I think the show relied a little bit too much on the source material in that, like,
Mhm.
what they tend to do with like first books is that they'll have like the side characters to be super fucking annoying, by the way, and then they'll always be like they'll like you said, they'll be an antithesis to like pretty much everything, and she's one of those characters. But then when you get into her story, they show that like she's grown, quote unquote, grown up, and she has like different world views at that point. Like they do this every single time. Like every time I read something and I'm like, I really hated this character before, but now something it's like they kind of change the character over time. And I don't know if it's like a youth thing or if it's just like the written version is terrible. And so they just kind of went with it and tried to like make the best of it as they could. But I don't know. I think part of it is definitely probably how she was written more so than
I think it's a how she's written problem for sure. And I
yeah.
think I agree that this is like super common in the historical romance side. It's one of the reasons I'm honestly not a huge fan of them.
Mhm.
Um, I think you could have had so like I think one of the better versions of like a character that shows this is the Bridgerton mom. I actually don't know her name.
Oh
But
yeah.
Violet.
she seemed like Violet. She was like a very she seemed to me like underneath that there is a complicated character written there. She has wants and desires. She clearly wanted to be a wife. She knows that that's the best way forward for her family. So she easily imparts that on her children, but she wasn't a wallflower either. She
Mhm.
didn't just let things happen. She was very active in her role. She's very like quick to yell at her son. And I think there's a really interesting element there about what happens when you're the oldest person in the room with the most experience and you raised a baby, but because that baby is a man, he has total domain over your entire life and the lives of the rest of your family.
Mhm.
I like that her Featherington, like those are really interesting to me. When you start looking at Daphne and Eloise, again, they were just like
I
two extreme opposite sides that I just like
Yeah.
was not into.
I don't think they so Eloise is she has to be younger than 18. She's not in society, so technically she's only been hanging out with her family and her friends. So she doesn't know anything about the world because she's been at home for 18 years and she's not out yet. So anything she's learned from her brothers and she's learned from her sister being out and like the occasional party she goes to. That's kind of the reason why I understand she's so juvenile and like one dimensional is because she hasn't lived any life. And I don't think they really showed that she's literally a baby who
I
has
do
no
think
idea
yeah, I do think
about
they
anything.
show her as quite selfish, like, but I do think they did that part on purpose. I do think that's, like, more of, like, a written on purpose part. I don't know that they showed her as a child on purpose. I think she was just, again, written poorly.
I think it's like a very easy trope to fit a character into, and I think that's exactly what happened. Like she just fit that trope, and there wasn't really anything special or interesting about her. And I think that could be said about, quite frankly, literally all of the characters, except for like the most fully fleshed out ones to me were again all of the older women. I
Yeah.
almost was like, can I watch a season about them?
I do think that her type of character can be written really well in historical. I do tend to like those historical romance books quite a lot, even though that's like a trope or whatever that doesn't seem to fit. I like it better.
There's the ones who like don't really want to get married. They want to like be on their
Yeah.
own, have their own money, but then they also have to reconcile the fact that you actually do have to get married to be anything in society. And
Like the exact opposite is Daphne, where she's like perfect to be a duchess, and you're like, I hate that. Like I find it so boring. Like I was
well,
like,
it's
I
like
don't
she
want to
has
watch
no
this.
wants or desires outside of family life, and like, but then when she marries Simon because she doesn't, and he says, "I can't have kids with you," she's just fine with it, and like
I mean, the
that's
journey of her finding out how kids are made.
and like that's her whole story is based on the fact that she wants kids, and like the conflict of the last 3 episodes is of learning how sex works and how sperm works and how you have a baby, and like I don't think we needed that at all.
I will say too, what I'm just sort of thinking of, like as we're talking about this now, my issue with a character like Eloise as well is that at the end of the day, they're creating this character. That's how they're going to write her, but she's going to end up in a relationship.
Yep.
Like they
Exactly.
haven't created a complex character that's going to do everything she can to forge her own path. She is eventually going to marry someone, and it's not going to just be because she has to get married. It's going to be because she loves them, because it's a romance series and she's going to be a main character, and that's what's going to happen to her. And it's like, why? Like, why did we do any of the things we just did then? Like, create someone more interesting, please.
I mean,
But
it
I
could be
think this is a
interesting to
great.
see though, to be like, what is she gonna sacrifice or not sacrifice, or like, what is she gonna? What's the
The
word?
question, will she make the man sacrifice something? Because that is what I like reading. Because I'm like, they should have to sacrifice everything.
Based on the description I read of her book, it's bleak. So, and I've never read her book because, again, don't care.
But okay, we kind of touched on it. We should talk about
Go back.
the
Yeah,
degree
as I
of
say, I think this
consent.
takes us into the consent issues quite well.
Okay,
Mhm.
I'll talk about the book scene, and then we'll go into the late in the season, episode 6. We'll say
Six.
they're
Six.
honeymooning. They're fucking all over the place. In the library, on in the backyard, on the lawn, in the like church thing on the thing. And then Daphne this whole time doesn't understand how you have a kid. And to have a kid, someone has to I was gonna say I don't know.
Steph, are you learning for the first time?
You
learning for
did,
the first time.
was this informative to you?
He has to finish inside of her for her to have a baby, but she has no idea that that is how babies are made. So she asked her maid, not her mom. Her mom told her birds and the bees bullshit. Her mom said nothing. So she asked her maid, "How do you have a baby?" And then the maid tells her, "I wish we could hear what she said because I thought that would have been interesting to see how she's explaining it to her." So the book version, Simon is drunk, super, super, super drunk, like grossly drunk. She takes him to the bedroom and basically rapes him, essentially.
Also, just to get in there, and I could be wrong with this because, like I said, I didn't read it. I just learned this from like reading other people discussing it. She got him drunk, right?
I can't remember, but I think so, yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, she like plied him with those drinks.
So she plotted basically to have
So
him
it is rape,
come inside of her.
essentially.
Yeah, so in the book it's clearly rape. She fucks him. She doesn't I think I don't know what he says. He's too drunk. He's literally too drunk to speak, so like that happens.
Oh no.
In the TV show, they take out the drunkenness, but you see her sitting in her like parlor plotting how she's going to get a baby from him.
She forces him on the bottom. She like basically gets on top so that he can't remove himself without throwing her.
Yeah, and he clearly says, because I put the subtitles on to see if he says anything.
Yeah,
Some
he
people are like,
does
he didn't say anything. He says, wait, twice, and she just powers through.
And he knows, like in that moment, he fucking knows. Like he sees it in her face that she was like, "So you did lie," and she says it out loud. Yeah, and you're just like, "Fuck."
And her whole goal in this obviously is to basically force this man to come inside her because she learned for the first time that day that the reason that he pulled out every time they had sex was because that's what could have made her pregnant. And so she's like gonna force this pregnancy, even knowing that like this man didn't want to have children enough to frame it as I will never have children or I can never have children. And within the same day of learning that is like, well, fuck that noise. I've been lied to. So I'm gonna shroud you. And then I think like an insidious element to that too is at that point when they're having sex and she gets on top, he's just happy. He doesn't know what's going on. He
He's
just
Mhm.
like
thinks
clearly
they're
into
having
it.
sex.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, absolutely get on top. And then there's the moment where he realizes what's going on. And then the scene, and I think this is where the biggest issue is, not just in that they chose to have this, that this was their fix, quote unquote, which is
Yeah.
super problematic, but then every moment after that, all the space is taken up by her emotions and her feelings of being
Mhm.
lied to with no conversation about. In my personal opinions, I think it's very realistic that this character would not realize that Daphne didn't realize he was saying he didn't want children and thought that he was saying he physically could not have children because she understands sex so little that she does not know how this happens or what is going on. Like you get the suggestion throughout the show that the mom has actually told them even less than the average woman would know
Yeah.
because of how little she does not want to talk about this topic. So you get that idea. And then every moment is Daphne talking about how she feels and how she's been wronged and all the space she has taken up. And then it's her journey of realizing why he doesn't want to have children and then her coming to terms with that, but him still apologizing. And no space is taken up for his traumatic experience and
Mhm.
his lack of ability to heal. How could you ever trust her again
Yeah.
to have a relationship?
Instead of, like, actually talking to him, be like, "Oh, he said he can't have children. Is there a reason he can't have children?" Like, instead of just, like, asking him, she's like, "Nah, Imma do this, and then I'm gonna accuse him, and then I'm gonna walk away and live in my feels, and that's it." And then you're like, "What the fuck just happened?"
And it pissed me off because he never tells her with his words why he
Yeah.
doesn't want kids. She
She
goes and
asked
finds these
other
letters.
people.
Yeah, and asks other people. I'm like, hello, that's none of their business. It's between you and him." But you went and found those letters, which he clearly had hidden from you, and you go and read them without his permission, his father's letters. And
And
I'm
once again, Lady Danbury is used to further this
further the plot.
plot
Yeah.
and, like, fix them, and I'm like, "Why? Why are you no."
And I think we see that issue again where coming back to that race thing where it's like pick a
Mhm.
way. Either do this properly or don't do it. Like you could have literally just not had this scene
Yeah.
because one thing that we were talking about is like this was just unnecessary. They could have had everything that happens after she assaults him could have happened the exact same way if she had just yelled at him and said, "Why did you lie to me?" And they just had your typical romance poor communication where he's upset that she didn't come to him and that she talked to other people first, or he's upset that she thinks that he would do something terrible like willfully lie to her, and she can be upset that she feels like she's been lied to, and she can still slowly find out everything that goes on and what happened. Like you could have all of that without this, but
Mhm.
you chose to keep it in and not do it properly. So it's like pick a fucking side. Either keep this in and have a conversation about the lack of consent that happened and how she needs to learn not just about sex but also about you shouldn't do this. This is a horrible thing that you did. Like that's a
Mhm.
real conversation you could have had that would have been very surprising for this series to talk about how she took advantage of him and then all the layering elements of her being a white woman and him being a black man that
Oh,
comes
Yeah.
into that. You
yeah,
could have that conversation.
yeah.
If you're not going to, don't include this fucking scene. Don't do it.
This is, like, also the problem with just, like, romance in general. I don't think all romance writers do this, and I don't think it's just historical romance. I think it's a general romance thing. Whenever trauma is written into a plot, I don't know about you guys, when I'm reading it, I'm literally I'm screaming internally because I'm like, I know something's gonna happen and I'm not gonna like it because a lot of the time people don't know how to write trauma in a good productive way, and instead it feels like they're encouraging a certain type of behavior that I'm just like, I hate when you write. And like, I hate that this show, with all these people working on this show, didn't look at that scene and were like,
I
that
know.
was one person that wrote that trauma terribly and then re-traumatized a person rather than like redo that again in the show. They could have just done something different. They could have like done so many different things with that. They could have just like not, I would have personally just not included that scene at all. Like I just would have been like, let's just talk it out. That's what's gonna happen.
I mean, again, those books are 20 years old. We've learned so much, and like the discussions on consent have been so so much layered than they were 20 years ago, and you still included that fucking scene in it. And like,
This is 2000 isn't that long ago. Even though that's 20 years ago, that's still not that was still, like, I feel like that's still a topic that would
To
have
write
been.
about her forcing this man to get drunk,
Yeah,
yeah, 100%.
100%.
It was just so infuriating. And it's one of those things too where it's like, I imagine when they put this in as their fix, it's because they don't see anything wrong with it. And there's a million layers onto that. But I think where that also becomes particularly dangerous is, again, a lot of this discourse is just not going to happen for so many people. Like, you're making a Netflix series, it's very popular. Any Shonda series is also very popular. So they're like, there is a weight to that too. And this is not an issue that just Shonda shows carry, but like any popular show that you know is going to be seen by a lot of people. A lot of people are going to watch that scene. And if they're not in the right spaces with the right people, they're never going to stop and take a second to say that was done wrong.
Mhm.
And so you're even seeing now, like, a huge number of people are going to see that and they're going to see nothing wrong, nothing bad happened, because there was no acknowledgement that what Daphne did was actually traumatizing, was assault, was rape. Like, that doesn't happen or
Yeah.
exist in the show at all. So if you're a reader that, or a watcher that has never encountered anyone in your life that would have that conversation with you, you're going to continue being ignorant to this, and you're going to think that what happened is totally fine because the show, to a certain extent, told you that. And not that a show has to carry 100% of the burden, but you do have to acknowledge that. And I think then, looking on Twitter, there were also a couple people where their takes were so bad, I know the show didn't do it right. Because you're telling me this one person can come onto Twitter and say the people that are telling you, that are giving you a content warning for the series, are lying to you. They're lying. That's not a thing that happened. There was no issues of consent in the show whatsoever. That someone can watch the show and have that thought is a failing of both society and the show. Like, that is an issue on literally everybody. And then now it starts this huge discourse, people being like, what the fuck is going on? Someone else follows it up with, and this was the wildest take I've ever seen,
Mhm.
dubious consent in romance is not an issue. It's a feature. To,
Disgusting.
like, girl, what the fuck? To suggest that, like, and listen, I get that there's a lot of things going on in the world when you're writing down kinks, that kind of stuff. That's different when you're talking about like erotica versus when you're talking about romance books. You're talking about something that is portrayed as healthy, totally fine, a thing you can get over,
romantic.
not, yeah, romantic, exactly. That is so massively different. And all of this discourse is happening online. And
Mhm.
so, in addition to all of these terrible takes, again, there's just a lot of people that are never going to see this kind of thing and are
It's
going to
like,
watch
it's
this and
also
have
like
no issue.
they're also saying it like romance exists in a vacuum that wouldn't affect real life.
Exactly.
And that's what I hate about it. I'm like, it does affect real life. And people, this says a lot about society, as you said, and it says a lot about like what people think is okay. In like when you read a book where they talk about like protection, it's a huge deal because not a lot of like romance books will take the time to do it. And I think it's important to do it, obviously, because part of reading is education, right? So like it, like even if it's a romance fictional book, that should always be in mind, the audience that you're talking to, because you say that you're writing for yourself or you're writing for romance people only, but you're really writing, you don't know who's reading this. Like, you honestly do not know. There could be some random little girl picks up her mom's romance book and is like, I'm gonna read this. Oh, this is fine. I'm just gonna let this go by in my own life.
I think a great example of that, and something people need to consider even more often, is look at what happened after 50 Shades of Grey. That book was so popular that like a huge industry for like bondage, sex toys and things like that starts booming. More and more people start exploring, but they're exploring and they're starting that off of such a terrible example. So when you
Mhm.
consider that that's what's happening, like, that's such a visual thing that you can see happening because of the sales of this industry. There are no sales of industry of people's thoughts around consent and what's not consensual and what is. There's no chart that you can pull together of that. So you can't see the effect that's happening. But if that's the kind of thing that people are taking away from these kinds of books, you have to assume that's happening in both the book and the series for this show as well. People are going to walk away and no one is going to, when again you could have had a huge audience to have the conversation of like, what is male consent and why is it important and how is it not okay when that's taken away, just as it's not okay. Like, one of the major plot drivers in this show is that, quite frankly, Daphne was concerned that that random Nigel guy from the first couple episodes was basically going to do to her what she did to Simon.
Yeah.
Like, that is
Mhm.
a thing that happened in this show and is never talked about. So either have that conversation or don't. And it's wild, and it also just leads to, it's so messy and portrayed so poorly that it leads to this mess online, that like being on Twitter the last couple days going through this has been an insane journey.
Well, I think the thing about like romance gets shit on, like romance books specifically get
Yeah.
shit on so much that people, anytime someone comes for a romance and you're a romance reader, you're going to get defensive about it. But you can be critical of romance because you should be critical of romance because I would say consent has only been a real that I've read on the page has only come up in the last like 5 years
Mhm.
because when I was reading in 2015, new adult was so hot, which was like university kids doing it, and like those were the worst books I've ever read in terms of like this kind of stuff, like consent and like abusive boyfriends and like power dynamics that are really gross. And only in the last 5 years, especially specifically in like romance, not like historical romance, I've been reading on the page like, are you
Yeah.
okay with this? Like, can we continue? Like, are you okay? Like, how do you feel?
And I
Can you
hate, like,
say
when romance
yes?
authors are, like, gatekeeping and, like, well, you can't comment if you're not a romance reader or writer or whatever. Some kind of what kind of doesn't matter. Human relationships doesn't matter. It's all a thing.
What's like it's true like mass media, like popular media doesn't really understand romance because anytime they're trying to critique it, they're talking about like Jane Austen and who's in like another one. I can't even think of anyone else. That's their like cornerstone of romance. I'm like, that is not that's the 1% of a romance reader thing. So like I maybe it's because people are so defensive about it that no one is talking about these
Mhm.
issues in a way that's productive and like because a lot of romance readers I've been reading on Twitter just like I'm not watching this series. And I was like, maybe you should watch the series and then
Yeah.
comment on like why is it bad and where in your books are do you show stuff like this and do it better? That's why I was kinda mad that they were like, "I'm not gonna watch it," and I was like, "You should watch it, and you should be telling your readers, like, why this is not good, and, like,
And then
what they could have done better as
yeah,
from a
and
writing
also, like, see the
perspective."
kind of, like, critiques that are coming like, valid critiques, not, like, the weird takes on, like, Dubcon, but, like like, actual valid critiques and take them into your own writing at that point because, like, you have, like, this huge like we said, there's a huge massive audience on Netflix that is watching this, like, people that normally probably wouldn't have read Bridgerton.
Have never picked up a
Exactly.
romance book
There's,
in
like, a
their
huge
life.
discourse happening on this. This is the time to, like, learn from it and, like, improve the romance genre, and, to say the romance genre isn't hasn't improved in the last 5 years would be a lie because it has massively changed over
Mhm.
time, specifically because of, like, writers like Courtney Milan who are like, "Just fuck everyone else," and it just, like, does what she can to, like, make it more diverse, and, like, consent is a huge issue, obviously. Guys.
And I think it's so important that, again, like, one, shows this properly and people talk about it properly. Because I think, listen, if you're like a Black woman and you don't want to watch the show because of the colorism, and you're like, you've seen enough genre shows before to be like, I don't need to watch another interracial relationship. I don't need to see more dark-skinned Black women pushed to the side to be either miserable or alone. 1000%. But if you're not going to have this conversation because of what people are saying about it with the consent issues, and you're not concerned about being triggered, you're just like, oh, I'm going to pass. It's like, this is an opportunity to talk about it because you also have an audience. So it's so frustrating to try to have, or to try to be involved in discourse with these kinds of things, because you just get stuck in between two extreme issues of, again, romance gets shit on so much by people who absolutely have no business commenting on romance. Like, they've clearly come to it from a place of, I don't like this and that's why I'm making this comment or being derisive. And then the defensiveness to that means that you have all these ones who they're like, how dare you say anything bad about Bridgerton? You're just trying to tear down a romance book as a series. We need more of these, all this stuff. And it's like, there's an in between of, put
Yeah.
out better content, and no, it's not always going to be more popular than some of the like shittier stuff that's happening. But this wild, like, back and forth of absurd comments means you end up in a situation where you're defending all the wrong things. Like, I still think back to the historical accuracy one, where there's so much defense of being like, there should be more Black people and people of color in romance stories. What are you talking about? One, it is historically accurate. And two, even if it wasn't, we should have more. So you're defending what Bridgerton has done, even though Bridgerton didn't go anywhere near as far as it should have, and quite frankly, should have had way
Mhm.
more Black people and way better representation than it did. So you just end up stuck there and like, I don't want to defend it for these reasons, but I have to defend it because the reason you're mad is the wrong reason to be mad.
Do you think it's irrational for me to be mad that these romance authors won't even watch it. Because I'm like, let's say a producer comes to them and like, I want to make your series into a TV show. How are you going to know what they're going to do? Or like, I don't want my show to be XYZ that I saw in this. Like, that's what I would want them to say and be like, I saw that the show did this really poorly. I wanted to do better in mine. But am I irrational being like, you guys should like at least try
I
it?
think it really just depends on who
I
the
don't know.
author is, but there's whenever stuff like this happens, there is always a bandwagon of people who don't have that the business having the stance that they do, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's lots of
Yeah.
people because again, there are some frustrating things in the show. Even though I really liked it and overall I do recommend it, I can absolutely see how there are frustrating things that would make a person not want to watch the show. But then there are some people where when they talk about not wanting to watch it, you know why. And again, it's not the right reasons. It's not because of the issues around race. It's not because of the issues around consent. It's because you've made a decision that is based purely on like nothing, or it's because you were never going to watch it in the first place because you didn't care. Like it's
Or you read one review from one person that may or may not be
yeah, it's
correct.
again, if the only person you listened to was that one woman saying, "Hey, there's no content warnings to be concerned about here whatsoever," you're going to go in with a very different opinion than a person who decided to not watch it because they were like, "Hey, there's a content warning." So it's just like it's complicated and it's so wild. And I think, yeah, for sure, there's lots of people that don't watch it. Like, you shouldn't if you don't feel like you don't have to. But then there's some people where it's like, you should learn how to do better. You're probably making a lot of the same mistakes in your own writing. So maybe
Yeah.
it's a good idea to understand what people are talking about. Here's the thing, at the end of the day, I'm gonna watch season 2. It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
It's like what they did well, which was
Costumes, the
costumes,
hair,
the music, the
the
hair.
social elements of like trying to this is the one thing about period romances that or period even fiction that I do actually really enjoy. The way people have to navigate their interactions with everyone. I love that shit. Like, I cannot wait to see what is going to happen with Featheringtons now that they have literally zero money. Um and but then also everything going on with Penelope. Like, I have so many questions because one, like, can a lady just go broke? Like, are they gonna end up homeless? No, she's gonna have to remarry, presumably. Like, that
But it's harder to remarry because they have no dowry to give, so it's like a whole but the best part about a historical romance is when they insult you to your face in the nicest way possible, and you're like, "Ooh, this is cutting." And I wonder how they're gonna do, like, a season 2. The book 2 is Anthony's book, which they set up in this first season, so I wonder how they're
I
gonna
do
do
think
it.
they made I'm so torn on this because I feel like I don't hate Anthony as much as everyone else does, but I do think they made him too unlikable. You
They
know what I mean?
absolutely did.
Like, I feel like I had to put too much work into the way I feel about him to not hate him. So how are you going to make him a lead? And what, like, I know the book is out already, so like whoever his romance person is already decided, but I'm really interested to know like what's going to happen going forward. And I think it could even be interesting to see the idea of this is maybe not necessarily for historical romance, myth is maybe just for something else, but the idea of a man going into a marriage for the betterment of his family and its lovelace, and how does that affect him as somebody who did have someone he loved and for a moment there was kind of willing to throw everything away for her.
Also, he was the first man we saw the ass of in the show, so now, gotta follow
Oh,
the
yeah.
ass of
I
everyone.
was trying to figure out, why did I see this man having sex so many times when he is not the person? And I realized it's because they waited so long for Daphne and Simon to have sex. And I'm also going to throw out this up there. Sex scenes, they're only okay. Everyone talking about how hot they are.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, we just
no.
need to expect better. We don't have good TV. You don't have to pretend this is good. Just demand better. There's not enough of it. It's not very well done. At one point, Simon is like eating her out, but he is like head butting into her vagina. Like,
It's
it's
like
so
Yeah, it
poorly
was not
done.
great.
You know what I'm gonna say? That scene with him licking the spoon signed a check that the
Better.
actual scene could not cash.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, yep, agree.
Agree.
Well, I mean, I was basing it off 365
He
days. I'm
spit
like,
into her vagina in that
there
one.
there needs to be a merge between that sex scene and that I just saw, and then push them together, and I hope for the best.
There was There was an interesting tweet I saw too. I think we talked about this in Christina Reed's, where one thing I don't love is when the man teaches a woman to have sex. That one always I find very frustrating. But someone had this interesting version that they were saying they saw in a couple romances, which was their first time is only okay because it's her first time ever. So there's lots of things, but it's less let me teach you and it's more let me learn what you like.
Yeah.
And it's basically kind of like
Yeah.
the woman learning how to just instruct him on what she wants and then him taking that information, them having banging sex. And I was like, I love that dynamic.
Also,
I would like to see way more of it. Where did you read it? Please inform me.
also, like the fact that there's like no pain the first time. Like I'm like, you're telling me you were penetrated for the first time and there was nothing. You weren't even so.
She
You
was
didn't even talk
so
about
into it.
how it might hurt a little.
And you know what? This is where I'm going to come back. You in fantasy, in like a fantasy romance, your first time sex was great. Fine. Don't then tell me that all this race shit is real. Build me a fully fantastical universe. Blind casting, I can way easier believe then that also the first time she had sex was real because we're living in a world that is about good time feelings and not about this fucking nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they were also so short. I'm like, the promise of a romance book is you're giving me 6 pages of foreplay that build up to an explosive sex scene. You did not cash my romance check because they were like, what, a minute long? I don't
Yeah.
give me 15 minutes of them. Like, is that out? I could take 3 sex scenes than the 8 that we got. I don't know how many there was, but like, give me 15-minute, three 15-minute scenes instead of 8 of
One heroine that's just like, my preference is not penetration, and just like
Yeah.
they're like, all right, we're gonna have other sex.
Which actually would have been perfect for this couple.
I know. You would think.
But again, it's the source material, I think, is what really fucked this.
This probably was not the best book to go from, but I think it'll be interesting to see if we have more things that lean into what a romance book is in TV because I think where this really fell apart, everything we've talked about is it was too much like a regular TV show. It made all the same mistakes that so many other TV shows like this have made in the past. Even if they weren't necessarily like based off romance books. Like you have the ability to do something different, do it. I think we talked about this before. I was thinking about it. Like I really like a lot of the first seasons of a lot of Shonda Rhimes' shows, but she has not these shows have not evolved in any way. The people that are making them have been doing the same thing over and over and over again. So it's not that surprising to me in that frame of reference that this show was also a little bit rote and a bit expected because no one's really challenging anything. Thinking about this now, I feel like the biggest change they needed to make to the show was to have the Bridgertons be black.
Yeah, agreed.
The way that contextually changes
Yeah.
everything, even just the importance of having Daphne be declared the diamond from a black queen and to have black family in a world where you're telling me that
Yeah.
it's not equal. It's not the same because there's so many more white people than there are black people in this space. Like the way that changes everything.
Yeah. Like you're telling me like the one interesting like black nobility person is Simon and we're not even going to have him as a main character probably next season. Like I don't know if he will be. I mean, like why would we be interested at that point, right?
That's what I'm questioning. How are they gonna people clearly love him. I love him.
I think one thing that's super interesting too about the show is that we've been talking about this for about an hour now, and we've gone through so many topics and so many things about the show. Never once does the issue of their clearly big reveal and big point of the show come up, which is
Oh,
that
yeah.
Penelope is Weatherbottom or Winterbottom. I forget what she fucking is called.
Lady Whistledown.
Wintergarden?
Whistle down.
Whistledown. Whew, man.
Weatherbottom.
It feels like it's been 3 months since I watched the show. It's been 4 days. Lady Whistledown? I like
Featherington.
literally forgot it the moment that you said it. Whistledown. We didn't talk like there's nothing to have a conversation about with that. They did the reveal, which I feel like they did just in case they got canceled. And it is what it is. It's Penelope.
Like, it must be a red herring, right? Because like you're telling me a 15-year-old girl goes to the presses.
Why did they do it? So the whole like the interesting thing about the books and like kind of why you want to read it is to figure out who she is. They only reveal her in book 4. And you have no idea this whole time who she is. And I think that they shouldn't have done that.
I will say I'm not mad they revealed it too early. I imagine probably the reason was if they got canceled, they wanted that out there. Like it just Netflix in general, so many season 1 shows get canceled. I actually like that they revealed it. 2, maybe in the show it won't be her. And this is a red herring because all the people who are watching it expect it to be Penelope. So they're giving you that like because even as I was watching it, I figured it was going to be Penelope because she's the only one that knew about the pregnancy.
Mm-hmm. And she was the only one that had like fuel to use it against Marina. And also, she definitely would have written shit about her own family. She hates them.
Exactly. Like that all seems super
Yeah.
clear. So maybe they are actually trying to throw in a red herring. Maybe Whistle Down, not Winter Garden, is multiple people. So maybe they'll be throwing something like that out there. But I think an issue this is a personal feeling. I get that like maybe this is actually not the best approach. Shows like Gossip Girl, they wait so fucking long to reveal who these people are. By the time you get to the end, either A, they've completely contradicted themselves and it doesn't make sense that it was that person anymore because the reveal is the whole point. Or B, it was just like it's anticlimactic because you knew it was never that good. So I am kind of interested to see her like being an active part in her secret and figuring out, are
Yeah.
you getting paid? How is this happening? Your family has no money. Is this I thought this was a free pamphlet. Like I don't understand. 2, how is she going to leverage this and how does she keep her secret from everyone?
Yeah.
Because Marina was really nice to you at the end. There's no way Marina would ever be your friend when she realizes that you're that person.
Yeah.
You were ready to ruin her life. This is the 1800s. She could have like never seen the light of day again with that information being out there.
And like, will Eloise like find out what's that going to be like? Will Eloise because like even just like the way Penn was like dismissive to Eloise whenever she was like investigating, you knew the whole time that Penn already knew because she was whistled down. Like there was like just like the way she was. I was just like, well, it's her. But then I'm like, where is she writing this? How is she writing this? Which context does she work with? Like the what is her name? Like the fake French lady.
Oh, I loved her. I loved her
Oh
so
yeah.
much. Mademoiselle something something.
Yeah, but like the
Oh,
whole
she
like
was great.
situation, like, do they have a relationship? Like, what's happening? I need to know
Because she
everything
clearly
now.
knew something. She had to have known something.
Yeah,
That
she
whole
knew.
exchange couldn't have just been she thought that Eloise was talking about her fucking her brother. Like there had to
Yeah,
be something else
I
going on
think
there.
I think what they're probably going to like with another season, they're probably going to talk about like the relationships Penn has to be able to do what she does, and I think that's one of those relationships, which I'm happy about. Like, I'm here for it. I just like the idea of multiple people being technically part of the Lady Whistledown enterprise.
I also, there in a sense, I actually do like that storyline for a fat girl.
Mhm.
Even though she's not that big, like when you look at her, particularly in relation, like they're telling you in real life she would be much bigger. Like that's also another element of this because I find her storyline is so boring. Where it's like, oh, you're the bigger sister. Everybody thinks you're unattractive. This is your life. Like she's very much a like Cinderella character, where like eventually she'll flourish. But you just see the same things that you kind of see overall. And then having her be a dick friend and being kind of a bitch is like a rough storyline, I think, to put on her that again just sort of there's only 2 things you can be when you're fat. You can be really happy and jolly, but be shit on all the time, or you can be a bitch. And those are the only 2 options you have. So I like the idea of this girl using her invisibility because of being bigger as a way to do this, but I have to then have the trust in you that you're going to do the storyline well. I do not have that trust, but I will watch the whole thing.
Oh, we never talked about Benedict. Sorry, they're all
Oh,
the same.
Benedict.
Benedict, my
Mm.
new
The
man.
only Bridgerton brother worth anything. Like
Yeah,
Colin is fine.
It's
Sorry,
true.
Colin is too young. He
Eh.
needs to grow up a bit before he can be interesting. I am slighted that Benedict did not fuck a dude this first season.
yeah, I agree.
And I'm just like, it
I
would
was here
happen.
for
Like,
it. I was like, you're building it up. It's going to happen. And then instead it's 2 women. And you're like, oh, okay.
Imagine if this had been like a imagine if this show had had an entire season dedicated to like a gay dude.
The audacity not to now.
Like the way that this could have been structured if you had just changed it and committed to that and like not made such a historically accurate thing and just been like the like I love those gay historical romances where it's just like yeah whatever you can marry a dude everybody's fine with it. It's just the social shit that's still in place. I would watch the fucking shit out of that, my friends.
Like, I
Hands
don't
down.
understand why showrunners just don't do it. Like, do they not understand how obsessed we would all become? Like, it wouldn't they could have a lot of problems in the show, but, like, if they had that one thing that you're like, "Oh my god, I'm here. I can't go away.
A valet.
I can't quote you."
I certainly watch a lot of crap just because there'll be a queer couple in it.
Yeah.
Like, give me something. Like, just throw one. You know how many people are companions? Like, Lady Danbury and a companion? Hello.
Oh,
I would have loved that. I'm so
Maybe-
sad. Oh my god, I would have. Now I'm mad I
Maybe
don't have
that's
that.
coming. I mean, it could happen,
Netflix,
right?
if you're Chris Van Dusen,
Listen to me.
as much as we've criticized you,
Don't listen to the rest of this episode.
Just-
Scroll all the way to this part.
take these options that we're giving you. Easy options, just add them in.
Don't be cowards. Let Benedict be by.
Yeah. Just like a light kiss. Maybe they tangle swords, as I've said briefly. Maybe they have a threesome together. Like,
Yes.
I'm giving you options
That
here.
wife would have been
And
ready
it's-
for it. She would have been ready. She would have
Exactly.
been like, all right, let's go.
Yeah.
She's his wife.
I was like, are we gonna have like a Sense8 moment? Is that what's gonna happen? Because I'm also here for that. Have her watch. It's fine.
All right. I think that wraps this episode up for us. Thank you guys so much for listening. Ultimately, if you haven't watched Bridgerton, you've learned a lot of spoilers today, but we do recommend that you do watch it. If you have any thoughts about Bridgerton, you can tweet us at EatsCast on Twitter as well as on Instagram. You can check out our Pinterest at Everyone and Their Sister Pod. And then just have the conversation with us. We are super excited for another year of a show every week. We're going to try. Let's see if we can keep that up. But that also means we need lots and lots of episode ideas. So please message us your episode ideas if there's anything that you want us to watch and comment on. We have a couple of themed episodes coming up. So please keep an eye out every Tuesday at 8:30 a.m. for our new episodes. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for listening last year and for another year with us. Bye.
Bye.
Music credit goes to artist Whereabout for the song Wallflower and Jazz Hard for the song Please Listen Carefully. While there could have been boobs and I would have probably been fine, I was pleased to never be attacked by titty the way that a show with like sex, like gratuitously to a certain extent is.